Good afternoon, I'm Abe.
And I'm Frank. And today we will be adumbrating the second half of Chapter 2, The Planting of English America, in Kennedy, Cohen, and Bailey's The American Pageant textbook. So Abe, we talked a lot in the last half, about the colonies and about the cash crop, tobacco. But what about the cash crop, equally popular, of sugar? Where was that grown?
Yes, so sugar was grown in the West Indies. As the British were colonizing Virginia, they were also settling in the West Indies as Spain's declining power had opened the door. By the mid-1600s, England had secured claim to several different West Indies islands, which included Jamaica in 1655. Lots of sugar was grown there, and sugar was the foundation of the West Indian economy. It was a rich man's crop, unlike tobacco. Sugar required extensive planting to be commercially feasible as a cash crop. And it required mills to be refined and extensive amounts of labor. This labor was provided by black slaves, and to control all these slaves, certain codes were established that defined the legal status of slaves and the rights of the masters had over those slaves. Most prominently was the Barbados Slave Code, which gave masters complete control over their slaves, and they had the power to inflict vicious punishments. The effects of these sugar plantations were numerous on the West Indies. The West Indies began to depend on North America for their food, because sugar was taking up so much of the land. It made lots of small English farmers migrate out of the West Indies because the large growers were taking up all the space and land. So therefore, South Carolina was founded and similarly adopted the Barbados Slave Code. So, Frank, could you tell me about what was happening in the Carolinas during this time?
Yeah, absolutely. So, at this time, just background, we have the English Civil War going on in the mother country of Great Britain. So in the English Civil War, we see the crown get executed, passes to Cromwell. The rule of Oliver Cromwell is eventually ended in the restoration of the monarchy. Charles II takes the throne. And this interrupts colonization efforts. However, once Charles gets back in place, they begin to recolonize, and Carolina is named after Charles in honor of his being the restored monarch. So Carolina is first founded in 1670. Carolina flourished by developing close economic ties with the West Indies, with these Caribbean trading outposts that developed sugar and brought in slaves from Africa. So, they created the port of Charleston in order to have these close economic ties and have a major port that could bring in and send out those products. Many original Carolina settlers had come from Barbados and had brought the strict slave codes that you talked about with them, so that when slaves arrived to help with the rice plantations in Carolina, they were subjected to these brutal slave codes that we saw in the Caribbean. However, Carolina wasn't safe from Indian attacks and from the Spanish. It saw several wars with both those powers throughout its existence. However, it proved to be able to defend itself after a certain amount of time, and that's why it persisted to become a colony. So Abe, nowadays we have North and South Carolina. How did that occur?
Yes, so many of the newcomers to Carolina were called squatters, which were basically this ragtag group of people who owned no land, and they usually came down from Virginia. So of course we had these two distinct categories of Carolinians developing. We had the aristocratic and wealthier down south around the Charleston and rice and indigo plantations, and then we had the North with a strong resistance to authority. So it's evident, and it makes sense, that in 1712, North and Carolina were officially separated. North Carolina shares with Rhode Island several distinctions. They were both the most democratic, the most independent-minded, and the least aristocratic of all 13 colonies. North Carolina did have some conflicts, though. In 1711, they engaged in the Tuscarora War, which is basically when the Tuscarora Indians attacked North Carolina, and the Carolinians responded by crushing the opposition, and they sold hundreds of the Indians into slavery and left the rest to wander north to eventually become the sixth nation of the Iroquois. South Carolina defeated the Yamasee Indians, and with their defeat, almost all the coastal Indian tribes in the South had been vanquished. Now, Frank, could you tell me about Georgia? What was Georgia's role with the 13 colonies?
Yeah, so Georgia is the last of the colonies to be chartered, and it's mostly serving as a buffer state between the Spanish colony of Florida and the English 13 colonies. So it's serving as a buffer to hostile Spanish settlements in Florida and Indians who constantly launched raids against the state. It was founded last in 1733 by a high-minded group of philanthropists, mostly James Oglethorpe, and it was meant to be a haven for those struggling against debt. So not the wealthiest of people live in Georgia when compared to Carolina or Virginia. All Christians, except for Catholics, enjoyed religious toleration, and many missionaries came to try to convert the Indians, because remember, there's still many Indians living south of the border in Florida. John Wesley was an example of one of them, except he later returned to England to start Methodism, as those who took AP Euro should know. So when we look back at all the plantation colonies, we notice 5 distinct similarities between them all. First, slavery is the key economic system employed by all of them. Second, the population isn't concentrated in cities, but rather widely dispersed over the entire state. Third, cash crops of tobacco and rice are the main crops that are grown by all farmers and plantations. 4, there's some religious toleration, except in Georgia. 5th, and finally, there are perpetual clashes with the native Indians and the Spanish in all of the plantation states.
Thank you for watching. Please comment, like, and subscribe, and we'll catch you guys in the next video.